In this part of the video, we will talk about financing biodiversity protection, a topic that is crucial for everyone working in this sector. On a global level, it has been calculated that between 150 and 440 billion US dollars a year is required to fund the Aichi biodiversity targets, while the costs of maintaining an effective and globally representative system of protected areas are estimated to range from 12 to 77 billion US dollars a year. It costs EU member states around 7 billion euros a year just to maintain the network of Natura 2000 sites and national protected areas. Apart from incurring direct costs, nature protection has another significant type of cost that presents an issue. It is called an opportunity cost, and it represents the loss or reduction of economic and development opportunities when it is necessary to restrict land and resource use in the interest of conservation. In Europe alone, opportunity costs contribute to massive 80% of the 10.6 billion euros annual outlays on implementing EU biodiversity policy. Considering all this, it is hard to be surprised that in practice, obtaining enough financial resources for biodiversity conservation is still a major challenge. It is important to understand that securing enough funds for biodiversity conservation is not a one-time deal. At the same time, it is also necessary to manage finances efficiently, effectively, and sustainably. Rather than focusing only on fundraising, most conservation planners are now concerned with identifying long-term financial solutions designed in a strategic manner. Most importantly, there is a need to tailor them to the specific context and conditions under which they will be implemented. As you are well aware, the Western Balkans hosts a wide variety of natural landscapes, ranging from the Mediterranean coastal zones through rivers, forests and steppes, to alpine high mountains, and the great diversity of species that inhabit them. In accordance with the global and regional goals, Western Balkan countries have set ambitious targets to expand and diversify nature conservation approaches. National biodiversity strategies and action plans include a range of measures to achieve these goals. Although rich in biodiversity, the regional economies are not so abandoned. A decade of instability left these relatively new democracies in a severely weakened economic and political state, and regardless of the growth experienced prior to the COVID-19 crisis, public budgets remain limited, overstretched, and subject to multiple competing demands. Consequently, it is often difficult to make the case for biodiversity, especially in the face of other pressing needs for funding from sectors that are widely perceived to be more economic, productive, or making a greater contribution to development. So where are the obstacles to securing funding for the environmental protection in the Western Balkans? Yes, the lack of funds is often recognized as the greatest constraint conservationists face, and it is the case in the Western Balkans as well. But it is not the only one. It is very clear that sustainable financing of biodiversity involves much more than just ensuring that sufficient funds are secured. Often, there is a lack of long-term strategic planning and insufficient human and administrative capacities to adequately address environmental issues or manage the existing funds effectively to support conservation. Sometimes, there are also difficulties in justifying conservation budget requests, lack of high-quality projects, and weak absorptive and spending capacity. All these are the reasons why environmental investments are not higher, and why ministries of finance are often reluctant to grant higher budgets to environmental ministries and conservation agencies. There is little doubt that the public budget should form the core of conservation financing in the Western Balkan economies, as is the case in other parts of the world. It remains a basic government responsibility as well as a stated commitment to ensure that biodiversity ecosystems and protected areas are maintained and adequately funded. It is, however, unlikely that the public budget will ever be enough to meet the costs of nature protection. Moreover, it is equally true that conservation is not the responsibility of the government only. Businesses, consumers, investors, institutions, all of us, no matter our position on the market, build our plans and opportunities upon the natural resources. That makes us responsible for ensuring they are not depleted, and one of the ways we can do that is by contributing to financing the protection of those resources. Other mechanisms that are linked to the ongoing processes of market expansion, European and regional integration, privatization, industrial and infrastructural expansion should also be involved in this respect. Around the globe, many different mechanisms are being applied to finance biodiversity conservation. They can be distinguished based on the following: fund source and target, where they can be private or public, self-generated or originating from the outside. Type of instrument or its underlying motivation, for example, user fees, rewards, damage compensation, philanthropic contributions, and commercial investments. Or whether they seek to generate, administer, or distribute funding. Have in mind that these mechanisms should be carefully assessed and chosen. Their introduction may require new knowledge, skills, institutions, and regulations, and may take time to start producing positive results. If not chosen and implemented properly, new biodiversity financing mechanisms will fail to produce results. So, considering all these issues, it was apparent that there is a need to identify biodiversity financing mechanisms and approaches that reflect the wider regional and global concerns related to nature protection, but are appropriate to the Western Balkan context. From such a need, the Sourcebook on Sustainable Financing for Biodiversity, Ecosystems and Protected Areas in the Western Balkans was born. The main objective of this document is to provide public sector environmental and economic planners with information about sustainable financing approaches, instruments, and real-world case studies which can be discussed and applied in the Western Balkan region. The Sourcebook includes information on lessons learned and offers recommendations about opportunities and ways forward in enhancing the financial sustainability of biodiversity, ecosystems, and protected areas in the Western Balkans. Refer to this document for a deep dive into financing conservation projects, which we have briefly covered in the past 5 minutes, and see which recommendations you could tie to your current circumstances and professional goals. We hope you find it to be a useful ally.
Before we conclude the final episode of the video course, let's focus on the application of the ecosystem services concept within the context of protected areas. Protected areas are usually considered as one of the best ways to conserve the nature, not just because they are established to preserve particular species, habitats, natural values, ecological and evolutionary processes, but they also aim to introduce and advocate more sustainable way of natural resource use, as well as to improve people's attitude towards nature. However, each aspect of establishing a well-managed protected area has its challenges, from the establishment processes and design itself to management planning and implementation of conservation activities. Where do these challenges come from? Their source can be found in the so-called middleman role of protected areas. The need to harmonize nature protection with human demands towards the area, towards the nature. In that respect, the ecosystem services which link biodiversity with the human well-being have emerged as a useful aid in the protected area management. As you have already learned, ecosystem services are the material and non-material benefits that humans receive from the nature. So, if these benefits can be revealed for a particular protected area, incorporated into its management and communicated to stakeholders, that can greatly help its conservation efforts. In episode 3, you got acquainted with the concept of ecosystem services assessment and valuation, Essav. We define it as the process of describing, measuring, and analyzing how ecosystem services are generated, managed, used, and perceived. It incorporates biophysical, economic, social, and institutional aspects of ecosystem services. Then, in episode 4, you have heard about the practical ways of mainstreaming the ecosystem services into development planning. If you haven't watched these episodes yet, make sure to do it. For the concept and approaches we describe, we can also be used and applied within the protected area context, either during the establishment of management phases. How? Assessing and valuing ecosystem services can help to inform and support protected area planning and management decisions. In general, Essav connects ecological knowledge with social, economic, and political concerns. In practice, that looks like trying to find answers to both these questions with the same project. On one side, we have an ecological question, such as how big an area needs to be conserved for the ecosystem to function properly. And on the other side, we ask ourselves, how will the protected area alter the local community and the general community economic and social prospects? Remember, the concept of ecosystem services is a bridge. That is why it has a strong communicational value. The concept of ecosystem services softens and opens up the conversation between nature protection sector and other stakeholders, such as local people, decision makers, resource users, business community, and general public. Essav process seeks to recognize and strengthen common goals of biodiversity conservation and local livelihood. The goal is to abandon the old-fashioned win-lose mindset in nature conservation, trading it instead for a pursuit of the common ground. Strengthening this relationship contributes to a better understanding and appreciation of nature and can assist in the harmonization of the activities on conservation and use of nature. Finally, bringing stakeholders together to assess, understand, and prioritize the importance of ecosystem services can help to create or strengthen protected area management partnership. Even though different stakeholders have different demands and agendas, resources, and dynamics, they can be powerful allies once they realize that they share common interests and goals. Furthermore, a proper understanding of which ecosystem service the protected area offers and who has access to them can be a valuable tool in solving conflicts within the protected area. From everything previously said, it is easy to see how important the integration of the ecosystem services concept into the processes of protected area establishment and management is, so that decision makers at all levels and from all sectors can work towards more sustainable land and resource management. As you know, the focus on the video course you are watching is on the Western Balkans. It is a region famous for its exceptional natural values, rich biodiversity, and the network of conserved natural areas. These protected areas are under a wide range of threats and pressures, although they are a foundation of the healthy life of the region's ecosystem services. For this reason, the ecosystem services should be more visible and present in the protected area establishment and management in the region. We have created a document that reflects this imperative. It is titled Guidelines on Essav and intended to be used in the process of preparing studies for the proclamation of protected areas and the development of protected area management plans in the context of Western Balkans. The guidelines are based on the Essav methodology explained to you in the previous episodes, additionally tailored to the protected areas practitioners in the Western Balkan region. By creating the guidelines, we wanted to help you gain insight into how capitalizing ecosystem services can make establishment and management of protected area more effective and sustainable. In the first step, the guidelines will help you define what are the most important natural and other values of the protected area and how they should be conserved and maintained. This process also involves defining the geographical scope of the assessment, as ecosystem services flow often goes beyond the physical borders of the protected area. For example, pollinators from the protected area are affecting crops in its neighborhood, wetlands are mitigating floods for downstream areas, and air purification goes far beyond borders of the protected area. In step 2, all ecosystem services for particular protected areas are listed, and after listing, they are screened towards the conservation goals in the protected area in order to identify the priority ecosystem services. You will find the details on our prioritization approach in the guidelines document. Third step starts once the 4 or 5 priority ecosystem services have been identified. Then it is time for their assessment and evaluation. You will obtain guidance on how to collect and analyze relevant recent and historical data, and which methods to select for ecosystem services assessment. By interpreting the result of methods, such as comparing the old and new maps, calculating statistical data, conducting the field research, you will be able to determine the status, trends, and underlying causes of changes of ecosystem services. How much do we earn by preserving the ecosystem services? There is an option for the calculation of the economic value of ecosystem services in order to translate natural values to monetary terms. While the previous step focuses more on the natural and ecological aspect of ecosystem services, step 4 makes links with the social and institutional setup and analyzes things like who is managing, using or degrading ecosystems and how, what is the legal framework, and how this relates to protected area. After this step, the guidelines user should know not only who are the most important stakeholders within the protected area, but also what are their positions, their attitudes in relation to nature conservation and how to communicate with them. Step 5. This step is all about identifying risk and opportunities. Risks are all recognized conflicts between nature conservation and users of priority ecosystem services, which need to be solved. Opportunities, on the other hand, are all potentials and joint goals between nature conservation and users of priority ecosystem services, which need further to be improved. Step 6. In the step 6, the guidelines will help you formulate concrete actions and measures that need to be taken in order to mitigate the risk and improve the opportunities from the previous step. These actions and measures can, for example, be changes in the level of ecosystem services use, changes of mode of ecosystem services use, changes of users, improvement of the habitats, changes of stakeholder participation, better communication or marketing. Sometimes recommendation can be to decrease or increase the subsidies, fees, as well as to decrease research or monitoring. Step 7. Finally, all the measures and actions that have been previously identified need to be translated into a clear plan of action, stakeholder engagement, and communication strategies for disseminating Essav findings. Step 7 details the process required to accomplish this, their time frame and responsibilities, and key milestones and targets. Why go through this process at all? Because ideally, the outcomes should be valuable contributions to the protected area management or establishing work plan and later fully integrated into it. As mentioned before, the guidelines are specifically tailored to the protected area practitioners in the Western Balkan region, so expect to see a number of examples from this very region. For instance, the document contains a section on the cultural ecosystem services of protected areas in the Western Balkan region, where users can find examples of some well-known socio-cultural values in the Western Balkans, such as songs, legends, archaeological artifacts, and movies. The guidelines has been specifically designed to be used by the nature conservation institutes and the processes of protected area establishment, as well as by the protected area managers in the region. So far, the guidelines have been piloted through 2 case studies, Bosut Forest in Serbia and Orion Mountain in the border of Montenegro and in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Republic of Srpska. In both of these cases, although they are very different, one of them is riverine forest and another is the karst area along the Mediterranean, a lot of important and interesting practical aspects of guidelines emerged and show how Essav can help in protecting the natural areas and connecting them with human livelihoods. We are very pleased with the feedback of the early users of the guidelines, and we hope that all other protected area practitioners in the region will also find this useful tool for their regular work.
To conclude this 5-part video course, we will touch upon the topic of education in relation to ecosystem services in the Western Balkans. The Western Balkans is a region rich in biodiversity that provides a suite of ecosystem services on which livelihoods and national economies rely to a large extent, but which is nevertheless in peril due to various forms of unsustainable use. Is there an awareness for the need for nature protection in the region? Certainly. Is there an awareness of the concept of ecosystem services as a link between biodiversity and human well-being? Not as much as there should be. In particular, this concept is still not a part of the decision-making process, even in these sectors that depend on the utilization of biodiversity and natural resources, such as forestry, fisheries, and agriculture. This is particularly important if we consider the fact that the Western Balkans and its ecosystems are deemed vulnerable to the effects of the global climate crisis. So, there is a strong need to raise the capacities of decision makers for integrating the ecosystem services into the decision-making process in order to address the drivers for biodiversity loss and reverse their impacts. To help with this process, we have developed a training program specifically designed for decision makers working in different sectors. We designed it particularly for practitioners in the Western Balkans working in sectors that are based on the management and utilization of natural resources such as environmental protection, agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tourism, energy, and water management. The aim of the training is to raise awareness of these practitioners as well as provide them with the relevant resources and support to start incorporating ecosystem services into their own work. It is structured as a 3-day training available both online and in person. It is composed of 4 core modules, of which you got a glimpse by watching this video course. So let's go through each one of them. Module 1 explains the ecological basis of ecosystem services and explores the links between biodiversity, ecosystem functions, benefits to humans and their well-being. Module 2 covers the institutional and policy framework for ecosystem services in the Western Balkan region and gives guidance on where to find a stronghold for ecosystem services incorporation within the national policy context. Module 3 introduces the concept of Essav and familiarizes with the relevant biophysical, social, and economic methods. Module 4 guides the civil servants through the 6-step approach for mainstreaming ecosystem services into the planning process. The training is designed as a combination of presentations, group work, guided discussions, and makes use of case studies and examples of best practices from the Western Balkan regions as well as the rest of the world. After completing the program, they should be able to recognize how different sectors depend on and impact ecosystem services and how that is reflected on the human well-being and development. Understand the concept of ecosystem services assessment and valuation and what data and methods are required to perform Essav. Recognize the steps and resources for integrating ecosystem services into planning process. Identify opportunities to introduce ecosystem services in policy planning and development in the context of your work. Value ecosystem service concept as a contribution to sustainable development. Provide additional value to their workplaces by giving insights about the dimension concerning the care for the ecosystem. If this is something you think may benefit you and your organization and would like to learn more, please get in touch. You can find our contact details in the description box below. With this, we have completed our shared journey through the world of ecosystem services in the Western Balkans. Our goal was to show you different opportunities for contributing to the better protection of nature in our region, and that there are already tools and resources that may help you in that process. Maybe even more importantly, we wanted to show you that you don't have to do this on your own. There are organizations you can reach out to whenever you have a relevant idea or just wish to develop your skills further. We hope you found this video course useful. For a deeper dive into the topic, do not hesitate to contact us. The Western Balkans has some of the richest ecosystems in the world, and with such abundance comes a great responsibility for their protection. It is up to us to spark the interest of others in the topic of ecosystem services and their better integration into the decision-making process. There are many opportunities for a post-pandemic recovery of our economies in the right way, and that right way is founded on the responsibility towards the environment.